This video is brought to you by MoviePalette.com and enter ROOM15 for 15% off of your palette. Hey horror fans, I am the Blood Guy and welcome back to another review of a serial killer documentary film. So the last one I did was John Borowski's first serial killer documentary, H.H. Holmes, America's First Serial Killer. And so this is going to be his follow-up from 2007. This is one that I don't own. This is one that I found for free on YouTube. So if you haven't seen it, you can go check it out on YouTube. There is a book version of this as well, or a book companion piece also written by John Borowski. And this is Albert Fish, In Sin He Found Salvation, which the book is called Albert Fish in His Own Words, which is all his, from what I understand, it's all his confessions and stuff like that. That I don't own, but I would absolutely love to get that. Both of them are kind of pricey, but this one is very similar to the H.H. Holmes documentary. Mostly very limited interviews, narrated by Tony Jay, who again is Frollo from the '96 Disney Hunchback film, and his voice is great. Mostly a lot of pictures, newspaper articles up on the screen, animations, and dramatizations. So very similar format to the H.H. Holmes film. It's not as chronological as Holmes. I mean, this one kind of jumps around a bit. It starts off with talking about the abduction of Grace Bud, his most infamous victim, 12-year-old Grace Bud. And sort of everything revolving around that, including the letter he wrote to Grace's parents. It goes into that. You have more voiceover acting in this one than the Holmes film, I do believe. But I still thought this was well done and still pretty good. The dramatizations are a very different style, because where Holmes looked, it was done to look like a sort of like a silent film. This one looks more kind of like your typical dramatization. Though I will say the guy playing Fish actually looks more like Fish than the actor in the film The Gray Man, which I have reviewed. So I don't have the book that goes with this, but I do have what's probably considered to be, you know, the definitive work on Fish, because it's Harold Schechter, Deranged. And of course, you know, Fish is very notorious. He's one of the earliest American serial killers, but just because of his victims, the ones we know of, being aged 4 to 12, and just what he did to these kids, and being a cannibal, he's been one of the most notorious ever since, you know, that very early age of notoriety in America. Like, his crimes rate went from 1924 to 1934. So he's pretty much in every serial killer book that you can imagine. I mean, he's on the cover of this one. This one's more of like a psychological book, like sort of like a profiling book. But, you know, he's also going to be in every encyclopedia that you pick up. This one actually just came in today. I've got 3 more coming in on Saturday, so. And he's going to be in like every documentary. I mean, this 10 episode set, episode 2, 3 is just Albert Fish, the Vampire of Brooklyn. It's one episode all for Fish. I mean, he's very notorious. So this one, it definitely has a different feel, a different atmosphere than the Holmes one. But it's still done very similar as far as just the look of it, the execution of it, who's in it, which it doesn't have Harold Schechter, which I was surprised because he wrote this book. I was kind of hoping that he was going to be in it because he is my favorite true crime writer. But again, written, directed, and produced by John Borowski. Tony Jay doing the narration. I think a lot of the same actors from the Holmes documentary is in this one as actors. But as far as people talking, we have a guy named Joel Coleman, I think it is, of Joel Coleman's Odd Itorium, which he's an artist that has a bunch of oddities, I guess. But he has the original Grace Bud letter. He's one of our main interviewees, along with PhD Catherine Ramsland, which I have a number of books by her, including her book on BTK, which is also a great documentary, the documentary version of that. So again, very limited interviews and mostly told through voiceover narration, voiceover acting for Fish, for his doctor, his psychiatrist after he got arrested, Frederick Wortham. There's an actor playing him. Actors and actresses playing, like Grace Bud's mother, Delia, other people important to the case. I think Albert Fish Jr., there's a voiceover actor for him. And it mostly is told through, like I said, you have dramatizations, which it goes a little far. I know all the actors are of age, but because he was really into some of the stuff he's in, there is like slow motion dramatization where there's just like a bare ass and just like a belt or a whip or a paddle just spanking it nonstop. It's supposed to be a child, just because of the story, but I'm sure all the actors are 18. And even when he's flagging this one person, they put blood on him. It's not like the dramatizations in this, where someone gets stabbed, but you can see that they're not even coming close to him. They actually put effort to make the dramatizations in this look real. It still looks fake, but more real than in something like that. And it does get kind of graphic. I mean, when they're talking about cannibalism, it shows like cooking roast in the oven. It really tries to put the image in your mind of what they're talking about. There's a lot of religious imagery shown because he was a delusional fanatic. And like H.H. Holmes, it does have a lot of actual photos, news articles coming up on the screen. Some animations like that where it's like a real picture of the house, but the background is like a color that's moving, kind of like moving graphic novel animation. In fact, there's one that's really creepy. I've always found the House of Wisteria, or the Wisteria area of Manchester, where he brought Grace Bud and killed her. I've always found that house to be incredibly creepy. There is an animation where they show the house when, Fish is giving the voiceover of how he killed her. And the picture that you see in here, they take that face, animate it to scale, so it's like he's peeking out the window, calling out to Grace, then going out like in behind the window. It's done in a very creepy way. This one, I would say this one is more effectively creepy than the Holmes one. The Holmes one had more atmosphere with, trying to evoke the silent film look. But this one was definitely creepier. It does do a great job at really getting into the sort of, not so much the profile, but I really don't like to say the mind of Albert Fish, because it's always been a pet peeve of mine when people say it gets us into the mind of a killer. No, it doesn't. But Catherine Ramsland does do a great job at explaining a lot of the stuff about Fish, like how he associates or his delusions with religion and cannibalism and his self-flagellation and everything. So it does do a very good job. I mean, like Holmes, it's not the most in-depth thing I've seen on Fish, but this one's actually longer. The Holmes one was an hour 4 minutes. This one, I believe, is an hour 24. Hour 26, according to this. It was an hour 24 on YouTube, but still. So it's about 20 minutes longer. and it's just as fast paced. I mean, it keeps your interest. It doesn't feel like just this straightforward, like how some people might find documentaries kind of bland. This is like the perfect mixture of sort of like a movie and like a documentary. It's presented more like a movie, maybe like an artsy kind of film with very little interviews interspersed throughout it, but told mostly through voiceover and pictures or dramatizations or animations. And that's one thing that I think John Borowski's documentaries stand out more than some other ones. So yeah, I liked this one just as much as the Holmes one. It's it's presented in a very similar way and style, yet still very unique to itself. It's a different approach in how it looks and feels, but a similar style to the Holmes one. So the only other one I know that's available to watch is his Carl Panzram one, which that one's on YouTube as well, and I'll be checking that one out. So I would say this one's kind of like the Holmes one, where if you don't really know much, much or very little or nothing about fish, this could be a good starting point. Get yourself, find yourself this documentary, check out this book, and then maybe you can dive deeper into fish. Because again, it's not the most in depth. It doesn't really talk that much about his cons or his scams, because he was a prolific con man as well. But it does get into some of the more graphic and disturbing aspects of his life. And it presents it, with full dramatizations and imagery to really put even the most disturbing elements of the story into your head. But yeah, it's not as chronological. It does start off. Actually, a lot of serial killer documentaries do this. Like Born to Kill or Most Evil, A&E, Biography. They all kind of start out with like the last crime and how they got caught, and then we jump back to their birth and work forward. This one kind of does that as well. But definitely recommend it. I mean, Fish has always been a fascinating figure. He's definitely one of the most depraved killers that's ever been. And I mean, the guy, it's been almost 100 years since his killing spree. His crimes range between 1924 and 1934. So we're coming up on at least 90 years since he was apprehended, and he's still known as one of the most notorious and depraved killers ever. So yeah, definitely a good documentary. I would say this is a good starting point, especially if you're of the type that, I mean, I love all documentaries, but if you find some stuff like A&E or Biography or your typical maybe sort of real crime or absolute crime like Most Evil, Born to Kill, documentary kind of bland or whatever, maybe want a little bit more art or more like a movie, John Borowski's definitely the way to go. So it's for free on YouTube. Definitely check it out. And if you can find the book, Our Fish in His Own Words, that would be a great companion piece for this. I will be picking that up at some point. So, yeah, I'm just going to do the same thing I did for the Holmes film. I'm just going to vaguely go over the topics that it covers and then leave it up to you to go see it. Because, as I said in my last review, I've always found it very difficult to review documentaries because I don't just want to relay the information. And that seemed to work for me. So, yeah, I liked this just as much as the Holmes one. It is very good. Not the most informative, but still a very good, it had all the basic stuff. It had everything you would need for any kind of fish documentary with a good artsy sort of art film backdrop like the Holmes one did. So I guess with that, we'll get into the short summary of Albert Fish and then just the short list of shorthand, vague list of topics that this film covers. So as always, just for those that don't know, I always like to give a short summary of the killer that the film is based on. So Albert Fish, known as the Gray Man, the Boogeyman, the Werewolf of Wisteria, the Vampire of Brooklyn, is not only one of the earliest notorious serial killers in America, being active between 1924 and 1934, and mostly in the Manhattan area, but one of the most depraved ever. He targeted children and has 3 known victims aged 4 to 12, but has been implicated in at least 4 to 6 other murders, and his most notorious being 12-year-old Grace Bud in 1928. He was a child abductor, molester, torturer, killer, and cannibal. In his later confessions, he would go into graphic detail of how he cooked and ate his victims. He also claims to have molested over 100 children around the country working as a house painter. Fish was also a delusional religious fanatic who took the biblical teachings very literally and associated the pain, torture, and consumption of others with his beliefs. Also a sadomasochist, Fish would also inflict pain on himself by self-flagellation, inserting needles into his pelvis, and paddling himself with a nail-studded paddle. Known as an elderly man with a non-threatening grandfatherly appearance, and that's probably what made him unassuming to people and trusting to children. Like Holmes before him, he was also a prolific conman and scam artist. Fish also had a compulsion to send lewd letters to women under various aliases, including a confessional letter to Delia Budd going into graphic detail of what he did to Grace. This is what led to his apprehension in 1934, and he was executed by electric chair in 1936 at the age of 65. And so now I'm just going to quickly go over the topics that the film covers. Sorry if I was stuttering through that whole thing. I'm doing these a little bit later than I usually do, so I don't know. You know I always stutter when I do these. But it starts off by talking about his arrest in 1934 at the age of 64 and his famous Grace Bud letter to her mother Delia Bud, which is read in full in voiceover, and the investigation into finding Grace. It goes into goes into a lot of detail about how he abducted Grace, and this is where it has that creepy animation where they, take his face from a photo and put it into the window of the house and animate it, and it looks very creepy. But there's also like this overhead map of that Wisteria area, and it shows like the footprints that he took her on. So it actually goes into quite a bit of depth of how he abducted Grace, where he took her, and everything leading up to that Manchester house. We see Joel Coleman's auditorium, which is where the letter is now, and he describes how it came into his possession. He's an artist, and he's sort of our Albert Fish expert almost, one that's not like a PhD. But, of course, we do get PhD Catherine Ramsland to sort of give us the profiling and psychological aspects of Fish at different points in the film. Some of Frederick Wortham's analysis of Fish, which he was his psychiatrist after he was arrested. So at a lot of points throughout the film, we'll get his voiceover as well, which is directly from his notes and transcriptions. So then that's when we jump back to his birth and Fish's childhood, his time at the boys' home, and when he first discovered pain and pleasure, his early adulthood and sexual experimentations when he moved to New York, his marriage to Anna and his 6 kids, his job as a house painter and how he used that to get to children, his sexually torturous relationship with a 16-year-old boy named Kevin. And these dramatizations go kind of far as well, especially when you keep in mind that this character is supposed to be 16. uh, how and when Anna left him and the kids, it delves quite a bit into his a religion and you know or his delusional fanaticism with religion. There's a lot of religious imagery and paintings it shows. Really breaks out a lot of aspects of his life, like the killing of children, the cannibalism, the way he tortures and mutilates himself, how all that ties in to religion for fish. A good chunk of the film is really devoted to that, which is very interesting because a lot of documentaries or podcasts that I've seen or listened to, it really just states that he's a fanatic. You don't really get the sort of psychological breakdown of what all these different things mean in a religious sense to him. So that is one thing that this film has over some other documentaries that I've seen. His MO when it came to abducting and killing children, it goes into the murder of 8-year-old Frances McDonald in 1924, the murder of 4-year-old Billy Gaffney in 1927, and a lot of these have voiceover narrations, from his confessions, which I believe is in that Albert Fish in His Own Words book, in graphic detail of what he did to these kids, all how he tortured them, molested them, ate them. I don't know if it does it for all of them. I know it does with Grace Bud in her letter describing what he did to 4-year-old Billy Gaffney. I think it does for Frances McDonald. Talks about the implications of the murders of 4 young Brooklyn girls in early 1933. Also goes into his self-flagellation and what that means or what that meant. His cannibalism, again with the voiceover narration, and sort of talking about cannibalism in general, and then what it meant to fish. His compulsion to send lewd letters to women, again with voiceover narrations from excerpts of some of them. His numerous days at psychiatric hospitals and evaluations. Yeah, he was in and out of hospitals towards the end of his freedom, and around the time of his investigation and arrest. So it goes into that. Goes into his needle insertion in the nail paddle, which those who know about fish, well, I did just say in the summary, insert it in his pelvis. His trial for the murder of Grace Bud, his execution. It does mention the needles in the pelvis and what that did to the electric chair, but it does say that it is a myth or an urban legend, so I commend it for that. And then it just kind of goes into the, for lack of a better word, legacy of Albert Fish, or just sort of his name and reputation throughout the years, and sort of his stance in true crime history. And that's basically the film. Obviously a ton more detailed than what I said, but I really didn't want to get into detail. But if you haven't seen this, but you've seen the Holmes documentary by Borowski, you'll definitely like this. I mean, it's the same formula, the same kind of style, but its own style at the same time. Some things are, in some ways, it is kind of basic information, but it does go more in depth with other aspects, like everything about the religion and breaking down psychologically a lot of different things about him and his crimes that other documentaries don't. It's still worth the time. It's still worth checking out. This one actually feels like a good blend of like a good creepy atmosphere / horror movie and a documentary. This would be a good spooky documentary to watch, especially with a lot of the imagery. Again, when they showed that house that he took Grace Bud to, always been creepy. So yeah, I liked this one just as much as the Holmes one. I've always been more fascinated by fish than I have Holmes, but I really did like the Holmes documentary. And yeah, it I've been wanting to get Albert Fish in his own words book for some time, but if the book has a lot more of like the voiceover narrations and sort of like full transcriptions, it, this definitely makes me want to read it more, and I'm definitely going to be picking both up. So yeah, another uh, solid documentary. Again, probably not as informative as like an A&E or biography or Born to Kill or Most Evil or something like that. But with its sort of uh, artistic sort of film school kind of documentary feel, it will keep your interest. So that is Albert Fish in his own words, the second serial killer documentary by John Borowski. Definitely a good follow up. Definitely a good, I mean, sophomore in terms of chronological order. Good sophomore effort after his Holmes one. So I will be checking out his Panzram documentary, which I believe is his third one, and then I'll just be going through some of the documentaries that I own. I am waiting on two documentaries to come in. Hopefully they'll be in sooner. But yeah, so Albert Fish, uh, I think I said in his own words, I meant in sin he found salvation. Solid documentary. Stay tuned for more, and thank you for watching.